Hi guys, welcome to the first of our video logs all around Microsoft Teams. Myself, Mike Weed, I've got my colleague Mike Gilroy-Scott, our head of our technology, who's been instrumental in delivering Teams to a lot of our clients and thought leadership in the market around specifically what we're talking about today is enabling Teams for a voice system and using direct routing. So Mike, we're going to go through a few questions. We'll keep it lighthearted and ultimately try and touch upon some of the things that we're hearing back from customers, some of the areas that people might be confused by, try and give some light to what is Microsoft Direct Routing, how can it benefit the businesses, and how also how Formation can help it. So, Mike, with Direct Routing, it might be worth giving the audience a bit of an overview of what is it, why was it brought out by Microsoft, and what ultimately how do you get Direct Routing into Teams?
Yeah, sure. So direct routing is one of the methods for voice enabling Microsoft Teams. The first method is to buy calling plans, numbers and calling plans from Microsoft. They become effectively your carrier, and you manage your calls and lines through Microsoft. Obviously, in the marketplace, especially in the UK, there's a lot of people who don't like to use Microsoft for their calls and lines or have incumbents that they need they've got contracts they need to maintain. So Microsoft recognized this. They didn't get a huge uptake, but obviously there was a lot of people wanting to bring their own trunks effectively to the service. So they enabled something called direct routing, which essentially means bring your own trunks. So that's how that came about, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that today.
Okay, and also in terms of licensing on direct routing, what do I need on my Microsoft side to make it work? So I've heard there's different licenses, and we've talked to different variations depending on E1, E3, E5, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So obviously there is a license to use this Microsoft phone system with Microsoft Teams. In general, you need a base license, which is usually a Microsoft E3 license or Enterprise 3 license. And on top of that, you would add essentially a license called phone system, and that enables a user to make and receive phone calls from the Microsoft Teams client. So then that's it is in its simplest form of the variations and licenses around phone systems, but that's a sort of minimum requirement to get up and running.
Okay, and that's on the Microsoft side, and then obviously there's lots of talk around session border controllers, SBCs you see in the market, not necessarily a traditional sort of IT bit of equipment, more seen in the voice markets and telephony is what we know. Talk us through a little bit, just very briefly, on the SBC and its main function, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So to get this service to work, Microsoft, given their infrastructure, obviously very wary that they want this service to work and work well. So they went out and created a sort of program to certify session border controllers. So you don't just take your trunks and deliver them straight into Microsoft Teams. They come in through a certified bit of kit, whether that be physical or virtual, and then they had a certification program to say, yes, this will work with our service. So those session border controllers are voice-specific devices that they can sometimes be referred to as voice firewalls, and they're used to proxy between your SIP carrier and Microsoft Teams.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. Next question, having obviously deployed a fair few of these Teams voice enablement projects so far, and obviously talking to a lot of our customers, what do you generally look for when you're deploying a Teams service? When we're talking about, obviously we talked about the licenses, the hardware, or the session border controller if it's hosted or put it on-prem. What other things would you recommend people watching they really think about when they're deploying Teams? And that's things like network readiness, some of those areas as well, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in its very simplest form, which we've gone into today, the components of your Microsoft phone system and Teams Direct Routing is you've got your SIP trunks to bring in your lines and your numbers and your calls into Teams. You've got your session border controller, and then you've got your licensing in Microsoft. But it's not quite as simple as that. Like, that's just to get things up and running. And once you're delivering your calls into Microsoft Teams, you've got to think about, okay, what can Teams do? How do I manage my calls within Teams? Can I have auto attendance? Can I have call queues? Those sorts of things. How do I route my calls in and out between staff members? So you need to have some consideration to the capabilities of Microsoft Teams and what functions are there, and also how to manage them. And do you understand some of these terminologies? So getting the numbers and calls into Microsoft Teams is relatively straightforward once you've got those components. But actually, the management and the design of the setup, a lot of consideration needs to take part in there, because it's important to note that Microsoft Teams is not a PBX replacement. Okay, it's a collaboration tool that you're voice enabling. So, a lot of thought needs to be put into how your staff working practices are going to change, because their collaboration tool is suddenly their voice tool as well. It's not necessarily a phone on the desk anymore. Quite a lot of people working remotely will be used to be using applications, webcams, microphones, those sorts of things, rather than that physical device.
Okay. And that's a good point. I think, we hear and banded around in the telephony world, at least, things like quality of service, making sure your network's up to speed for real-time voice. Often that's sort of overlooked, I guess, when you think about voice teams, especially in this home working. But as we see people going back to offices in the next few months after probably the new year, what are the things that people should look for ideally around that network, the underpin plumbing, if you will?
Yeah, Mike, that's really important, because I think, coming back to my earlier point about sort of moving away from that kind of desk phone experience, we're looking at applications running on computers. And if we ever start sort of moving back into the office space, your voice platform is no longer going to be separated from your computer. In that kind of traditional PBX world, you've got handsets sitting on a voice VLAN, which is very easy to then prioritize traffic, because it's not mixed up with all the data traffic. Obviously, you're now running with a Teams client on your computer, and you've suddenly got a big problem, because it's mixed in with all your web traffic, your email. It's just like, how do you make sure that your audio and video calls are unaffected by other stuff that's going on in that relatively noisy data network? So it's really important you consider that. You do some proper network assessments, validations. That Microsoft provide you some good tools and advice in terms of bandwidth utilization, which you can run. But I think the key is to probably talk to the experts and do a proper evaluation, because you throw these kind of voice systems in without any kind of planning or preparation, you can probably expect some issues.
Yeah, that's a good point, and definitely something we've seen with the network readiness tests and things that we do, isn't it? So, another, I guess, thing that's out there at the moment, we're seeing lots of, quite rightly, lots of vendors coming into the space around voice enabling Teams and, supercharging Teams. And you might read, anything from some of the traditional sort of vanilla services. So some of the network carriers themselves are offering Teams integration through their SIP trunks, and it's quite vanilla, and we'll talk about that, all the way through to the likes of the public cloud providers, your Ring Central, your 8x8, your Avaya Cloud Office, where they're saying, you can integrate with Teams utilizing their back office phone system. And then you have everything in between, hybrid builds. What is the right thing to do? There's so many options, Mike. Give us your view on the vanilla services all through to the sort of combined services. What's your opinion there?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in the market at the moment. Everyone's delivering Teams. I mean, 100 million active users, daily users on Microsoft Teams now. It's really skyrocketing, and everyone's falling over themselves to deliver something that has the Teams badge on it. Say, oh yeah, we support Teams. Yeah. My take on that is, they all do it, and they've all got a solution. So it's important you kind of consider what is the right solution for you. Those are kind of vanilla services you referenced earlier. They deliver direct routing. Let's call it direct routing as a service, where you buy it, per user cost. Brilliant. There's direct routing as a service. But if you look a little bit closer, they provide the service, but it's up to you to then plumb that into your Teams tenant. And then who's going to configure your call routing? Who's going to do the design of how that all the call flows and how that all works within your system? It's not going to be the carrier. So you may not have a PBX maintainer, and they may not know anything about Microsoft Teams. So there is a missing piece in there that someone with the expertise will need to come in to understand carrier networks, understand Microsoft Teams, and understand PBX and call routing and those functions. So that's from a sort of vanilla, Microsoft Teams infrastructure. Then you've got your other kind of UC as a service providers that have these direct routing capabilities, and generally speaking, they work very well. But then you've got this kind of weird situation where you've got this UC as a service, as your voice platform, kind of working with Microsoft Teams, but you're not really sure which one's doing what. So it's kind of almost a checkbox exercise. So, just be wary of that, that it might just end up confusing users as to what they're actually using as their business tool. So yeah,
That's a
just
great
I
point.
think a bit of consideration as to how you're going to do that. And I think the last point is, before moving into these systems, understanding what you need to work with what and what tool you're using for what. So you might have a legacy PBX system that's got an integration via TAPI into your CRM system, but you don't want to
Yeah.
use that, but you want to get into Microsoft Teams. Can I do that with these new services? Do they provide the flexibility? And, is that an option for me, or am I going to have to try and replicate this some other way that may not necessarily be possible? So, you've got to consider what are the right solutions for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we've seen a lot as well around the support. Once you, like you alluded to, if you get into taking on some of these sort of more defined services, who looks after your team side? They'll look after their core, necessarily the UCaaS providers, but they won't necessarily get involved in the team side, and you want that end to end. I think that's really, really important point. Touching upon what you mentioned there, again, something we've talked to customers about, we're really seeing is Teams has been amazing. It's taken over the world in the last 6-9 months. It's a great developing platform, but there are, naturally are still holes where they're developing, and Microsoft, to be fair, are plugging the gap with it. I'm a customer. Maybe, Mike, I've got a contact center that I've got that is critical, frontline. Microsoft Teams doesn't have a contact center. Let's be square on that. Maybe I've got some analog devices. Could be fax machines. Could be traditional lift lines. Could be any number of on-premise devices that I still need to connect into Teams. Teams might not be right. So talk to me a bit more about the hybrid role and really considering those end users across the business, anyone from reception all the way through to execs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, on that point where you've got this core business function, whether it be this CRM integration or, as you mentioned, this contact center application that you need to keep. And, fundamentally, it's not do I move to Teams, go, or do I dump all of that legacy? But then, those are really important business functions. That may not be an option. But, coming back to this hybrid, there are those parts of the business still need to maintain that. Now, it doesn't mean your back office can't then have Microsoft Teams as their voice tool. But the key to all of these things is delivering the right kind of SBC solution. These devices are enabling devices. They'll connect to anything and interwork with anything pretty much. So, we're able to sort of help our customers make those kind of decisions and go, okay, you've got this business function, they need this application. And we can say, okay, we can work with that. We can help voice enable your back office staff so they can get rid of that legacy, whatever they were using before. You can maintain that contact center for the staff that need that. We can voice enable your teams, improve efficiency in your staff communication and collaboration, and you can still maintain those contact center services.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? What we're saying to customers is Teams is good, but it might not be for 100%. So really think about the ecosystem. Receptionists, they love those traditional features. So why not keep them on say your PBX or your cloud system? Have 80% of people on Teams. Keep your contact center, and that's really the key to the session border controller, sort of bringing those worlds together, and absolutely something we're helping and doing with our customers. So Mike, that was just short and sweet on Teams overview. In terms of if someone was looking at this, thinking about it, they're welcome to pick up the phone, have conversations with us. We can explore, we can do pilots. Anything else? Any sort of closing advice you'd recommend for people looking at it?
Yeah, I think given the rate at which Teams have been rolled out into a lot of businesses, sometimes as a sort of almost emergency measure, not a lot of thought has been put into the structure of Teams. It's kind of happened and grown organically, and people have just sort of onboarded it, in a way that's not structured or planned. The other thing is that staff have just had to learn it. So, one of the other key things you can look at is, when we deliver these services, key to us is staff onboarding. It was thrust upon a lot of staff, and they really, they can use it because it's fairly intuitive. They can get around, but actually what's really important is getting staff to be able to use it properly and well and basically become experts in Teams. Once that happens, you really unlock its potential, and it's really important in making sure that your Team's delivery is a success.
So true. User adoption, key, isn't it? And it's the biggest thing Microsoft talk about, and they talked about with the Skype for Business to Teams migration. Help your users, get them to understand it, and they'll really utilize it. It's a very powerful platform. Mike, thank you. Audience that are watching, hope you found this really useful. We'll be delivering a number of video podcasts moving forward, all around, to Mike alluded there, around supercharging teams, making sure you're getting the most out of it. So please do watch out for more content. Please do reach out, and we'd love to talk to you if this is something you're looking at as a business.